Shavua Tov. All right, we're in chapter 1 in the book called The Laws of the Festivals. We introduced the general framework of the seasons of the year and how the Jewish people and their holidays reflect the natural process and the spiritual processes. And we we spoke about that the Jewish people themselves are central when it comes to the holidays, as opposed to Shabbat, where we say Mekadesh HaShabbat, it's Hashem who sanctifies the day, created the world. He decided to rest on the seventh day. So we say in our prayers, Baruch Atah Hashem, Mekadesh HaShabbat, blessed are you, Lord, who sanctifies the Shabbat. When it comes to the festivals, we say, blessed are you, Lord, who sanctifies Israel and the festivals. Because without Israel, there's no festivals. Not only because the historical events that we're celebrating, but also because the Jewish people have to sanctify the moon, the new moon. They have to set the calendar, and thereby set which days are the festivals. So there's a partnership in the festivals which we don't have regarding Shabbat. Okay, we're up to, we're going to start on page 6 now, section 4.
So you can say we don't have Jews, we don't need a synagogue.
That's true, and we don't need a holiday, which is our topic right now. The synagogue for sure not, but even the holidays, the Rambam mentions if there was no Jews in the land of Israel, we wouldn't be able to continue this chain of setting the calendar, which goes back almost 2,000 years. We don't have the eyewitnesses today with the Beit Din setting the calendar, but we base it on the continuity of the line of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. Okay, so section 4, it's about, so what do we do on all these holidays? How many holidays are there? Who remembers? We said last week?
7.
Yeah, so guys, yes, 5, 6, or 7. Those are all good answers.
6 plus Yom Kippur?
Yeah, 6 plus Yom Kippur is the way we read it last week, based on the Parsha. The Parsha, a famous Gra, insight of the Gaon Vilna, that in the beginning of the passage in the Torah, in Parshat Emor, which we just read, it talks about the festivals. It starts off with saying that you should work for 6 days and on the 7th rest. And he said it doesn't refer to the 6 days of the week, it refers to the 6 festivals of the year, and then Shabbat, Yom Kippur, Yom Kippur Shabbat. All right, so 6 festivals, Pesach, day 1 and day 2, meaning the end of Pesach. Sukkot, the beginning and at the end. And then we have Shavuot, that's 5. And then Rosh Hashanah, that's it. And then Yom Kippur, of course, is the 7th. So 6 plus 7. Okay, so what do we do on these days? So it says at the bottom of page 6, section 4, each of the 6 holidays mentioned above is a subject of a positive commandment to refrain from melacha, as well as a negative commandment against melacha. Thus, there are 12 mitzvot pertaining to resting on Yom Tov. Out of the 613, they count them as 12 different mitzvot, positive and negative for each one of the festivals. In contrast, there are only 2 mitzvot that deal with resting on Shabbat. Positive commandment to refrain from melacha and a negative commandment against melacha. So I guess you could say the festivals have more mitzvot than the Shabbat does, even though Shabbat comes more often. It's the same prohibition, the same positive commandment every Shabbat, whereas the festivals, each one gets its own unique mitzvah. This is because every Shabbat conveys the same message, whereas each holiday has a unique meaning. Accordingly, we are commanded separately concerning each holiday. Okay, the common denominator, of course, is that in both cases there's a positive commandment to refrain from melacha, as well as a negative commandment against melacha. One who refrains from melacha on Shabbat or Yom Tov fulfills a positive commandment. One who engages in melacha is both negating a positive commandment and transgressing a negative one, because shvita, that's the positive commandment, to refrain from melacha, is a requirement not just on Shabbat, but on holidays as well. Holidays are called Shabbaton, and occasionally even called Shabbat. I think we spoke about the Omer. We said that Mimacharat HaShabbat, you start counting, and according to our sages, it's referring to the Yom Tov, first Yom Tov of Pesach. However, the severity of the restrictions of melacha is not uniform. On Shabbat, all melacha is forbidden, while on Yom Tov, domestic melacha necessary for food preparation is permitted. The only forbidden melacha is that which is work-related. It's called melechet avodah. The word melacha is work, but there's a modifier, melechet avodah. Only work-related melacha is prohibited. The general principle is that the holier the day, the more we submit to divine providence, and the more we refrain from melacha. So in this way, I guess Shabbat is more holier than the Yom Tov. The punishment for Shabbat desecration is also more severe than the punishment for Yom Tov desecration. Sometimes we want to see and compare mitzvot. We compare what's the punishment. Of course, we don't know the punishment on high, but there is punishments that are meted out by the Beit Din. Of course, it's not practical nowadays, but in the day, there were designated punishments for each transgression. On Shabbat, if one intentionally performs melacha despite the admonition of witnesses, the Torah mandated punishment is death by stoning. If no witnesses are present, he's liable for karet, excision. If he transgresses unintentionally, he must bring a sin offering. This is the standard prohibition regarding Shabbat, every Shabbat. In contrast, on Yom Tov, if one unintentionally performs melacha in front of witnesses, he doesn't have to bring a korban. He receives 40 lashes. If he does, that's intentional. If one does intentionally, you don't get put to death. It's only lashes. And if it's unintentionally, you do not require to bring a sin offering. So we see here there's two ways in which the Shabbat is more severe than the Yom Tov. Even though there's many more, in the list of 613, there's many more on Yom Tov because each one has a unique mitzvah. But the severity of melacha is different. Only work-related melacha is prohibited on Yom Tov, whereas on Shabbat, all types of melacha. And the punishment is more severe for transgressing these punishments of Shabbat than it is on Yom Tov. Another difference, we will skip, it's a little bit, all right, we'll read it quickly. Another difference is that if one unintentionally transgresses several melachot on Shabbat during a single lapse of awareness, he must offer a separate sacrifice for each melacha transgressed. In other words, we divide up the prohibition of work into 39 categories. So if you write and you also cook, so you have to bring 2 sacrifices for each type of work. In contrast, if one intentionally transgresses several melachot on Yom Tov, after receiving one general warning, he incurs only 1 set of lashes. Okay, some detail. And of course, each festival has a unique schedule of sacrificial offerings, which differs from that of the Shabbat. Good morning. There are also mitzvot that are specific to the festival, do not pertain to Shabbat. As we know, in Pesach you have to eat, also eat matzah, Seder night, there's mitzvot, Rosh Hashanah, there's mitzvah to hear the shofar, Sukkot, there's mitzvah to sit in the sukkah, take a little of Shavuot, and Yashmin Atzeret, there's no special mitzvot apart from rejoicing. It's the main purpose of these 2 holidays to serve as an atzeret, a joyous gathering, celebrating the culmination of a process. Specifically, Shavuot celebrates the culmination of the process, beginning with the Exodus and ending in the giving of the Torah. And Shmini Atzeret celebrates the conclusion of the 3 pilgrimage festivals, as well as the culmination of the process of repentance, atonement, and joy. Okay, so the festivals are different than Shabbat. They both include this issue of work at various levels, a prohibition of working, various types of prohibition, but they're a little different, but they're very similar in that way, that there's a prohibition against working, both a positive and a negative commandment. But what's different is that Shabbat, every week, you've got the same festival, the same korban, and on the festivals they have their own unique korbanot, and also that there's extra mitzvot. additional mitzvot on the festival. Each festival has its own unique attached performance. Matzah, lulav, sukkah, etc. Okay. This is one of Rav Melamed's pet peeves. When we study the laws of Shabbat, he goes into great length. He's kind of unique on this, where he stresses so much that we, especially us nowadays who work for a living, and our weekdays, if we're working, are very packed, and sometimes don't leave us much time to study Torah. He says you must study Torah on Shabbat, every Shabbat, and now he's stressing the same thing about the Yom Tov. There's a mitzvah to study a great deal of Torah on Shabbat and Yom Tov. As the sages state, Shabbat and Yom Tov were given to us solely for the purpose of learning Torah then. And he goes into that. We're going to skip this section. But of course, you have to study Torah on Yom Tov, just like you have to study Torah on Shabbat, perhaps even more so. The festivals were given to us to connect to Hashem through studying Torah. So we're going to go to page 11 now and see something unique. As opposed to every festival and every Shabbat, when it comes to the purpose of a holiday, there are two verses which seem to contradict each other. We're going to see something very interesting about Shavuot. One verse tells us that the holiday is for God. You shall hold a joyous gathering for the Lord your God. Atzeret, that's the name we use for Shavuot and for Shmini Atzeret. But regarding Shavuot, it says you should make a joyous gathering. L'Shem Elokecha. So it's for God. While the other says that it's for you. In B'midbar it says, on the 8th day you shall hold a joyous gathering for yourselves. Atzeret tiyeh lachem. So, I don't understand. Is it a joyous gathering for you or for Hashem? The Gemara presents two ways to reconcile the verses. I'm on page 11 in the middle. According to Rabbi Yeshua, the Torah is telling us that we should split up the holiday. So half is for God and half is for you. Yeah, did you ever see that? Anybody do that? First half for God, second half for me. So I'll go to shul and then I'll, go to the beach. That seems to be what Rabbi Yeshua is saying. Well, okay, you can't go to the beach because it means you drive your car, and we know there's a prohibition of melacha. So what do? Split up the holiday. Half is, meaning half the day is spent on food and drink, and half is spent learning Torah in the Beit HaMidrash. Okay, Rabbi Yeshua says, half. We'll split it up. Rabbi Elazar's opinion, a person may choose. Either the whole day is for God, spent at the Beit HaMidrash, or the whole day is for you, spent eating. Even if one chooses to follow Rabbi Elazar and spend all day learning Torah, he must still eat something, so he will not suffer from hunger. While if one chooses to spend all day eating, he must still pray and learn some Torah in the morning and at night, and also have words of Torah to meal. Furthermore, even if one chooses to spend all day eating, this choice must be made for the sake of heaven in order to enjoy the sanctity of the day and to provide enjoyment for poor and lowly people. In practice, the halacha follows Rabbi Yeshua. So Rabbi Elazar's opinion is a little bit of a curiosity. You can choose to make the day all for you. Okay. It's impossible to make it all eating and drinking. But the bottom line is we follow Rabbi Yeshua's opinion. Rabbi Yeshua says half. So we should split up the day and spend half learning in the Beit Midrash and half eating and drinking. Someone maintained that one must be very careful that the half for God is indeed at least half. Or Chaim declares that if one takes more than half the day for himself, that extra part is considered stolen property. Others maintain it is not necessary to calculate precisely. One should just learn Torah approximately half the day. Usually people do not calculate the hours. And this is, I think, the common custom. Of course, Rabbi Melamed doesn't like this. He got his own unique opinion here. He says, unfortunately, the result is that we are very derelict about the time we dedicate to Torah. In order to revitalize this mitzvah, we need to start calculating the hours, become accustomed to dedicating half the time to God. And so he works it out that you have to learn Torah for 6 hours of Torah on every Yom Tov and on every Shabbat. and women are obligated too, if not the same type of learning. Anyways, the concept is very interesting, and in the context of Shavuot, we're going to see when we turn to that chapter, the last chapter in the book. The conclusion of the Gemara is that everybody agrees, even Rabbi Eliezer agrees, that when it comes to Shavuot, ba'ina nami lachem, we need to have half the day for you. So even Rabbi Eliezer agrees that even if you could choose on any other holiday to be all holy, maybe, and be all day studying Torah, on Shavuot you must have cheesecake. You must also have meals. Of course, we paskin like that every holiday. But Shavuot particularly, there's something that it has to be an element of joy in a physical way, a celebration, in a lachem, for you. And it's curious, when Shavuot, we're celebrating the giving of the Torah, you would think maybe the opposite. I think if all the holidays, which one should be most dedicated to studying Torah, you would think it would be Shavuot. The answer to that question, my friends, you have to wait until we get to chapter 13. We're still in chapter 1. But this is a curiosity. But the concept of that we do both is very, very telling about Judaism. Hashem wants us to be holy, but He wants us to be holy in our bodies. Holiness doesn't mean that we separate from our bodies. It means we try to connect all of our physical sides and all the material enjoyments and everything that we enjoy. Food, sex, drink, a community, joy, happiness, all that is a mitzvah. The way we're supposed to celebrate our festivals. Half. Of course, we also have to be dedicated to Hashem and be studying and be praying to Him and dedicate time to that. But the ultimate, the ideal is that we do both, that we celebrate for Hashem and for us. Hashem gave us the festivals for us to enjoy in the way people enjoy, together with our connection to Hashem on these days. Okay, and the best expression of that is, as he said before, even according to Rabbi Eliezer, you can choose to be totally dedicated to Hashem. You have to have 3 meals. 3 meals, that's a lot of food, or 2 meals at least. 4 meals. Well, let's see. By Yom Tov, take a look at number 7 on page 14. It is a mitzvah to have 2 festive meals on Yom Tov. One by night, one by day. This is one of the primary expressions of the sanctity of the holiday. All of the holidays are referred to in the Torah as Mikra'ei Kodesh, sacred occasions. The same term is used for Shabbat. In this area, the holidays are equal to Shabbat. The sages elaborated. How does one sanctify them? With food, drink, and clean clothing. Similarly, Rambam writes, just as we are commanded to honor the Shabbat and enjoy it, so we are commanded to regarding the holidays, as the verse states, call Shabbat delight, the Lord's holy days, honored. All the holidays as well as Shabbat are referred to as Mikra'ei Kodesh. Mikra'ei Kodesh, sacred occasions. There's a difference between Shabbat. On Shabbat, sages ordained based on allusions in the verse that we partake of 3 meals on account of the special holiness of Shabbat. In contrast, on Yom Tov, the mitzvah is limited to 2 meals, one by day and one by night. People need to eat 2 meals a day, every day, and the mitzvah on the holidays is to turn these meals into notable festive ones. And it is a mitzvah to eat bread at each of these meals. It's a mitzvah to have 2 loaves, just as we do on Shabbat. For the same reason, since manna did not fall on Shabbat or Yom Tov, a double portion of manna fell the day before Shabbat and the holidays. And the last element of the uniqueness of how we celebrate outwardly this sanctity, the sacred occasion, we mark it by special clothes as well. Even though Shabbat is holier than Yom Tov, on Yom Tov there's a mitzvah to serve better food and to wear fancier clothes than those of Shabbat because of the special mitzvah to enjoy Yom Tov, as we will explain in the next section. There is an extra mitzvah on Yom Tov which we don't have on Shabbat, and that is joy, simcha. So simcha, that's why the custom is we have different levels of clothing Fancier and fancier and fancier. More special and more honored. We have weekday clothing, and then we have Shabbat clothing, and then we have a third level, Yom Tov clothing. Same thing with food. We have weekday food, maybe 2 meals a day. That was standard in the day. And then Yom Tov, we have 2 meals, but we make them festive. And then on Shabbat, we have 3 meals. So you have to have 3 levels of clothing. Weekday clothing, Shabbat clothing, and then a third level of Yom Tov clothing. There's actually a 4th level. Where should you have fancier clothing? For which event?
Wedding.
A wedding. Even more fancier than the Yom Tov. So 4 levels. I once had 5 levels. I can't remember what the 5th level is right now. So maybe Yom Kippur.
How about Rosh Chodesh?
Maybe Yom Kippur is one above the regular Yomim Tovim, and then the 5th it would be for weddings. Rosh Chodesh, there's no mitzvah to dress fancy for Rosh Chodesh. There is some people, nowadays we really have no celebration on Yom Tov. There's no mitzvah on Rosh Chodesh. There's no mitzvah to have a meal even. You don't have to make your meals festive. But because it loses its meaning, if we don't do something special, some people have a custom to wear a little bit nicer clothing on Rosh Chodesh, but it's not an obligation. No. The way that halacha defines it, there's no mitzvah of joy, of simcha on Rosh Chodesh. So we'll see.
What about the 4th meal?
The 4th meal, we say Melaveh Malka. It's after the Shabbat. And it's a secondary level of obligation. It's not as the sages defined. 2 on Yom Tov and 3 on Shabbat. And then there's a concept, after Shabbat is finished, you should accompany the queen, Melaveh Malka. And that is an obligation as well, but it's not on the same level as the rabbinic obligation of the 3 meals of Shabbat. It's a special. Sometimes those extra mitzvot are more powerful than even the 3. Everybody knows the 3 you have to do, but that 4th one shows you that you're really sad that Shabbat is leaving, so it could express your subjective feeling towards Shabbat even more than the 3 meals you have on Shabbat. Okay?
How many meals do you have? 3, 4, 2?
Everybody has to do what the sages ordained. Sages obligated us to have 3 meals on Shabbat, so I have 3 meals on Shabbat. I try to do Melaveh Malka as well.
But if you don't do it, it's not...
You haven't violated anything, no. I try. Last night I was so full because we ate so much on Shabbat. And you eat the 3rd meal pretty late, 7 p.m., so I wasn't really hungry at night. But before I went to sleep, at around midnight, I had a snack. And I had in my mind, this is to fulfill my Melaveh Malka, the 4th meal.
Is it a bread meal?
Ideally, it should be bread. Like every meal is defined in halakha, should be bread. But for the 3 meals, you should have bread. But there's leniencies for the 3rd one. Some people don't have a full bread meal for the 3rd meal. And of course, the 4th meal also, you should have bread. But if you can't, I just had crackers. I didn't have bread at midnight. But I was thinking of that I don't want to go Saturday night without having a Melaveh Malka. And it's very special. In the wintertime, it's easier.
Yeah.
Your belly's not so full, and it's you eat at 4 p.m. So by 8 p.m., okay, so you have another meal. But it's a challenge. But it is a mitzvah. It is a mitzvah to show the respect and escort out the queen. It's not on the same level as the 3. The 3 are an obligation. The 4th is also an obligation, but on a lower level of obligation. Okay, yeah, and I had a question, yeah.
Well, if you can't eat gluten.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, if you don't have gluten bread for those people, what they eat?
Non-gluten bread, you mean, for those people? For people who don't eat gluten?
Because in the country there is no root bread, raw.
So, okay, so there is this, it's become more and more widespread. Unfortunately, there's something called celiac disease where it's bad for you, for your digestive system, and for your entire body to have anything made with gluten in it. That's the 5 grains that have gluten in it, the 5 special grains. Halakha considers 5 grains special: wheat, barley, oats, rye, and spelt. So people who are not allowed to, like my daughter has this disease, she's not allowed to have any of those grains. So any bread made from wheat she can't have, whether it's whole wheat, even oats is apparently not good for her. So she can't have bread. She doesn't have bread. There's breads you can make from potato flour. There's breads you can make from tahina. You can make bread from all sorts of almond flour, but it doesn't qualify as bread halachically. So she doesn't have to have any of those other things. What does she do on Shabbat for her 3 meals? She eats what she's allowed to eat. She's not allowed to do anything to harm her body. So she has fruits, vegetables, meat, everything that she eats, just not bread. She can't have bread. So
she could not do Birkat Hamazon.
she cannot do Birkat Hamazon. Yeah, and not only that, more troubling is that she cannot have matzah. Because matzah has to be made from one of those 5 grains. And some people are able, they don't have full-blown celiac, they just have some sensitivity to gluten, and so they can force themselves to have once a year, to have a piece of matzah, or there's special types of matzah which are supposed to be gluten-free, even though they're made from oats, so some doctors allow that, but it depends on the circumstance, on the situation. But essentially, there are people that are sensitive even if they don't have celiac. Personally, I try to stay away from wheat products, wheat-based challah. It's not forbidden. I don't have celiac. I'm not, but I'm a little. My stomach's a little sensitive, so I try to have spelt. My wife bakes beautiful spelt chalot, and they're delicious. So it's pretty easy, and that's easier for my stomach to digest. But if you can, you should have challah from one of those 5 grains, at least for the first 2 meals, if not for the 3 meals of Shabbat. And if you don't have any and you are going to hurt yourself, so then you're patur. Push yourself to have the matzah. That's if it's not dangerous for you. But for Shabbat, if it's really going to hurt you, Shabbat is supposed to be a delight. And so you would be exempt from having challah on Shabbat. Some people like to make this special other types of bread that looks like challah, but it's not really. You don't make hamotzi, and you don't say Birkat Hamazon. That's the standard psak. There's more to talk about. Does that answer your question? I'm not quite sure what your question was, but
Yes.
But you understand? Okay.
Can
Yeah.
I ask a
Yeah.
question
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
about the Seudah Shlishis? Because way back in Manila, in Chabad, we were not doing the Seudah Shlishis.
They have a unique ruling. Very on the edge. Of course, the rabbis of Chabad were great Torah scholars, and they have the right to go out on the limb once in a while with different rulings, but it's not the standard ruling. If you're not a Chabadnik, I would suggest not following that practice. Their practice is that the 3rd meal you can fulfill without bread and without fruit and vegetables or cheese or anything. You can fulfill it on words of Torah. Eat your words of Torah. But that's an extreme position. The standard law is that you should have 3 meals. A meal consists of food, and if not bread, at least other food. For the 3rd meal, there are leniencies, but to be so lenient and not to have any food, that's pretty much only the Lubavitch post scheme allow that. Yeah.
In Jerusalem, I come to a rabbi's place for Shabbat meals a lot.
Yeah.
He usually used the dessert of the 2nd meal as Seudah Shlishi.
That's cute. So he separates it off. He finishes his second meal. He benches. He says the Birkat Hamazon, and then he has, as if, an additional meal. It's really dessert of the second meal, but because he separates it off, he's fulfilling his mitzvah of the third meal. That's a trick. It's a good trick. It's a good trick.
Especially in winter, because
In the winter, it's much harder.
we sometimes start the second meal so late. Every time we start at 2:30.
Yeah.
And sometimes we
Yeah.
haven't finished the second meal yet, but it's almost the time to.
Right.
We were at the rush to
Right.
have a mincha and
Right.
Shabbat. So.
Right. So it shows that he's a Torah scholar. He knows he's got to stick to the rules and have 3 meals. But it's very hard to so he found a solution. He found a solution how to break the meal up into 2. It's a good solution. Yeah, it's a good solution. It's not ideal, of course, but it's in the situation, like you said, it's a short day and you started late. I try to start my morning meal early, especially in the winter, so that when it comes time for the afternoon, I'm hungry again for a third meal. And I have a proper third meal with bread. Yeah, truth is, I'm debating because I've been having trouble digesting even the spelt bread. It's just, I feel too full. And I'm considering being lenient about the third meal, not having bread. But I'll have something else. Some people have a cup of coffee and a piece of cake. Halacha says if you can't eat, you can fulfill the third meal even on fruits and delicacies. So you can do that. It's second best. It's b'diavad. It's the not less than ideal performance, but the world is less than ideal. Sometimes the ideal performance is too hard. But you should be eating something, even if it's just a piece of cake or a fruit, to fulfill that third meal. Like I said about my fourth meal, I tried to be careful about it and had something to eat, even if it wasn't a full, proper meal. But the obligation of the third meal is much stronger than the obligation of the fourth meal. It's various levels of obligation in halacha. Tov, anyways, back to the rules of Yom Tov. We said that Yom Tov are Mikra'ei Kodesh. They have festive meals and food and festive clothing. Sacred occasions which we sanctify by behaving differently, by eating differently, and by dressing differently. Next, and this is unique to the festivals, the Shabbat we have special meals and we have special clothing, but what we don't have, ostensibly, although it's a longer discussion, we don't have the mitzvah of simcha. That's only on these 7 days. Surprising? What are the 7 festivals? Michael, are you? You missed the beginning. Again, we reviewed. We said that there's 7 holidays, right? 6 plus 1. 6 plus 1. The 2 days of Pesach, the 2 days of Sukkot, 1 day of Shavuot, 1 day of Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is a festival. They're all similar in that you're forbidden from doing work, and that you have to be happy. Happy. There's a mitzvah of joy on Yom Kippur. And you know what expresses that we have a mitzvah to be happy? We're going to see it inside. We make the Shechianu on all of these festivals. And we'll see there's other ways to be joyous as well. Okay, let's read from the top of page 16. Okay, Gabi, will you read for us?
The mitzvah of Simcha is supposed to be mitzvah to experience Simcha in the festivals as it is written, shall rejoice in your festivals, V'samachta v'chakecha. We have already seen that Shabbat and Yom Tov are Mikra Kodesh, and that it's mitzvah to sanctify them with festive meals and fancy clothing. The mitzvah of Simcha on Yom Tov adds another layer, having more meat and wine at Yom Tov's meal than a Shabbat meal. As explained in the next paragraph, similarly, there is a mitzvah to have fancier clothing for Yom Tov than for Shabbat. On Shabbat, it is enough to wear respectable clothing, whereas on Yom Tov there is a mitzvah to wear the nicest clothing. If one must be festive clothes, it is proper to buy them before a festival. There are 4 components of the mitzvah of simcha. First, the primary expression of the mitzvah is to do something especially enjoyable, which causes one's joy to permeate the entire festival. Given the differences between men and women to bring men joy, festive meals with meat and wine should be held, as explained in this section. And to bring woman joy, new clothing or jewelry should be purchased for her before the festival. One item of clothing is enough to fulfill this mitzvah. See section 10 below. To make children happy, candy should be brought for them, and this is what makes them happiest. Second, as discussed above, the term Smichai Kodesh is applied to the holidays as well as Shabbat. It translates into a mitzvah to sanctify them with festive meals and nice clothes. Since Yom Tov has an additional mitzvah of Simcha, it is incumbent on both men and women to make sure that their Yom Tov meals and clothes are nicer than those of Shabbat. There is also a mitzvah to study Torah and Yom Tov because it is enjoyable. Third is the mitzvah that participates in whatever activities one generally enjoys, like singing, dancing, and going on outings. Fourth, throughout Yom Tov, it is a mitzvah to be in a good mood and to avoid things that cause anguish. It is therefore forbidden to mourn and eulogize or fast. One must enjoy the festival and not rejoice in something that is liable to make him forget about the joy of the festival. For this reason, one may not get married in Chol HaMoed. You shall rejoice in your festivals and not in your wife. One who gets married is so happy with his wife that he does not pay attention to the Simcha festival. However, you may get married right before Yom Tov. In Chol Sheva Brachot, the Yom Tov meals, because in this case, the Simcha of the festival is primary, and the Simcha of the Sheva Brachot does not detract from it, but rather reinforce it.
Okay, a personal question now for you. I'm going to go around the room. Whoever wants to share, you don't have to say. Think of an activity. Think of something that makes you personally, happy. What do you like to do? What brings you joy? Rabbi, do you have something?
Yeah,
What brings you joy?
be a tzaddik.
To be a tzaddik. All right, you better try to be a tzaddik on Yom Tov then. Okay, great. You should be very holy. What brings you joy? Anybody? What do you like doing?
Praying.
Praying.
It brings a lot of ecstatic feeling when you are praying.
Amazing. Wow.
The Kavanah.
Okay. You guys are holy individuals. I was going to say watching TV, You guys are such holy. You're praying. You're being a tzaddik. No, seriously. That's good. That's good. So you definitely things you enjoy, but you're people, not the angels. What do you like to do? What do you do for fun? Yeah. Playing piano. Amazing. Yeah, that would be a very good thing to do on Chol HaMoed. Because Chol HaMoed, it's still the festival, but there's no prohibitions of work, and the sages prohibited playing musical instruments because you might do work. So that's a tough one, yeah. I was also listening to music, I was going to say. I enjoy listening to music very much. But again, I can't use the electronics on Yom Tov. So sing, and singing is good. What other things do you like to do to have fun? What makes you happy, Michael Aryeh?
Spending time with loved ones, with friends,
Yeah.
quality time.
Yeah.
This is nice, what I like.
Sure.
Sometimes I also like.
Yeah. Of course, yeah.
It's nice to have it, and
Right.
studying Torah.
Yeah. Relaxing and reading, yeah, perfect. Those are things you should do on Yom Tov.
Singing and reading?
Relaxing. Relaxing and reading, yeah. And spending time with family, for sure. What else? What do you enjoy doing, Binyamin? Do you have something to share, or Israel? Anybody?
very lively Sabbath in the sense that we sing, we laugh, say joking.
Okay. Saying jokes is fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes you happy.
And
Should have stand up.
this is then I have a very nice nap.
Ah, it's nice. Enjoyable to have a nap for sure. Okay. Right? No? Anything you enjoy, Stephen? Anything that you...
Music also, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a more problematic one because we can't use the electronics. But so the sages, they made an estimation. It's a little bit based on the Torah. Because the Torah, when it discusses the festivals, it says you should bring these sacrifices that you get to eat. And that includes meat. So, and then, of course, it says, based on some psukim, that we're going to see later in the next section, it says, Ein simcha ela b'basar v'yayin. The human condition is such that we enjoy good food and good drink, meat and wine. So the sages actually designated it for us. Of course, you should do anything that you enjoy doing. Taking a nap, spending time with your friends, lovely. That's a mitzvah of simcha, of joy, on Yom Tov. And they said, for women, sorry if it's a little bit, not PC, that there are sages understood the differences between men and women. And of course, men like to get new clothes too. And women like meat and wine as well. But on the whole, the sages noticed that perhaps it's something that's more joyful for women to get new jewelry or new clothing. Makes them very happy. And men tend to be more happy when they have good food and good wine, more so than women do. I mean, we both have those elements in us. So they mandated that the simcha, the joy, including everything that we mentioned, you try to do whatever makes you happy. They defined that you have to make sure that you have something, meat and wine for men, and new clothing for women. It doesn't have to be a whole new wardrobe. It could be one item. It could be one extra food or one extra piece of jewelry that you get something new. It makes you feel good, makes you feel happy. 7 times a year, right? 7 holidays. Usually the first and the last days of Sukkot, the first and last days of Pesach, you don't necessarily have something new for each one of those. Although, it can get expensive, all this jewelry you're buying for your wife. But that's the idea. And you try to buy meat, assuming most people enjoy a nice piece of meat. Try to buy meat for those 7 days a year. 6.
6 plus 1.
That's it. Although there is a festive meal for Yom Kippur beforehand. Yeah. Some people say it's the mitzvah of joy on Yom Kippur is fulfilled in the break. It's called Sudam of Seket, the meal which breaks before the fast starts on the afternoon, before the eve of Yom Kippur. Okay, so this gets defined by our sages, even though, again, it's a mitzvah to be joyous in every way, and we're going to see that there's mitzvah to go on. Some people like to go out to nature. I was waiting for Israel to say that. He likes to take walks in nature. You should make sure to do that on the festival. A lot of people fulfill that on Chol HaMoed. When there's a week-long festival, you have an entire week to utilize it to go into nature and to enjoy. But there's more details now, a lot of details. I don't think we're going to be able to get into all of them, but there are some details here about meat and wine. There's details about the women's mitzvah of simcha. as we mentioned, but we're going to skip it because we really don't have enough time. What's important is on page 22, section 11, this should be mentioned. And this is something unique perhaps about the Jewish concept of joy. Nobody mentioned it here. Maybe Ravid was hinting to it. It says here, page 22. Michael Arya, will you read for us?
Page 22.
Yeah, page 22.
To enjoy and being joy to others. The mitzvah of Simcha requires a man to include his entire family in his enjoyment, and to include the poor and the despondent as well. This is not just a pious act, but is the Simcha required by the Torah. You shall rejoice in your festival with your son and daughter, your male and female slave, the Levite, stranger, the orphan, and the widow in your communities. Rambam qualifies it as follows. One who is eating and drinking on the festival is obligated to feed the stranger, the orphan and the widow as well, along with the rest of the rich poor. If one locks the doors of his home and eats and drinks with his wife and children, but does not feed the poor and embitter it, he is not experiencing the simcha of a mitzvah, but only the simcha of his God. About such people, the verse says, it will be like mourners, but all who eat of it will be impure. Such simcha is an embarrassment to them that says, I will strew down upon your faces, dawn of your festival offerings.
Whew. Pretty sharp words. The Rambam writes about those who partake of the joy of the festival, all the joys that we spoke about, but they don't include sharing them with others. Go ahead.
When we examine this issue, we see that the mitzvah of Simcha has two components. The first is to celebrate together with one's family and household members. You shall rejoice in your festival with your son and daughter. The you here includes both members of a couple because a husband and wife are considered one unit. In fact, when the Torah speaks more briefly of this Simcha, only the wife is mentioned. Rejoice with your household, as explained above. This teaches us that the husband's mitzvah of Simcha is first and foremost to make his wife happy. Similarly, a wife's primary responsibility of Simcha is to make her husband happy. We find this in practice as well as follows. A man's primary enjoyment is through the festive meals which traditionally his wife will prepare for him, while a woman's primary enjoyment is through new clothes or jewelry which traditionally her husband would buy for her.
Okay, skip now to the bottom of the page. The second component of the mitzvah.
The second component of the mitzvah of Simcha is to bring joy to one's neighbors and acquaintances who are poor or lonely. As the verse states, you shall rejoice in your festival with the Levite, the stranger, the orphan, and the widow in your communities. Generally speaking, in the past, the orphan and widow were poor as well, since there was no one to provide for them. As for the stranger or wanderer who has left his birthplace and family, is likely to suffer from loneliness. The mitzvah to provide simcha to the poor is also primarily by giving them charity, and the mitzvah to provide simcha to the lonely and broken-hearted is fulfilled primarily by inviting them to join the festive meals. It's not noteworthy that the comments also include the Kohanim and Levinim in our simcha. Their job was to teach and educate the Jewish people, both young and old. We can infer that today too we should find simcha to our scholars and teachers.
Okay, so we share the joy with others is an essential definition of the mitzvah of joy. Okay, now the next section he goes into a misunderstanding. A lot of people, they overspend when it comes to the holidays. Over too much money than you can afford. And they think, well, it says in the Talmud that all the expenses for Shabbat and Yom Tov are not, you don't have to put into the regular calculation. Hashem will pay you back for them. And because of that, they go into debt and they're irresponsible. And Rav Malabin wants to set them straight here and say, the Torah never allowed you to be irresponsible. Of course, the concept is you can stretch in a reasonable way to make sure that you can have something special, but not to buy the most expensive things. Oh, the Torah says I have to buy expensive jewelry, so I'll buy diamonds. Maybe your wife will be happy with something cheaper that you buy for her, as long as she knows you thought of her. That's the main thing. It doesn't have to be so expensive. But we're gonna skip that section. Again, we're rushing for time here. Singing and dancing, we mentioned that. Take a look at the bottom, page 26. Going on outings, we mentioned, but the bottom line is at the bottom of page 26, it says as follows. Unlike the mandatory mitzvot to have festive meals, wear nice clothes, and study Torah, all other activities that provide simcha are optional. If one finds them enjoyable, he should engage in them. If he does not, he need not. Every individual is permitted to decide what makes him happy on the festival, whether singing and praising God in the company of family and friends, dancing at a Simchat Beit HaShavah, nowadays a Sukkot celebration, which reminds us of the temple celebration, going on Tiyulim, or doing other enjoyable and worthwhile things. However, he must be careful that all this merrymaking does not detract from his Torah study. It's a mitzvah to dedicate half the day to study and prayer. When he takes great pleasure in studying Torah, he should dedicate even more time to it. So once he has fulfilled the mitzvah of enjoying the festive meals. So, to put everything in proportion, there's no really defined obligatory way to have joy on the festivals, except for the meat and wine and buying something for women and children. Like they get some candy or something, whatever makes them happy. But other than that, everything else, it's up to you. Whatever brings you joy, you should engage in more. And it's a wonderful layered mitzvah, the mitzvah of joy on the festivals. Primarily, it's defined by what you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to mourn. You're not allowed to fast. So much so, you're not allowed to mourn is that, let's say somebody, shouldn't happen to us, but if a parent dies, you have to sit Shiva, right? What does sitting Shiva mean? Mourning. For how long?
7 days.
Shiva, 7. Right? 7 days of mourning. What happens if they die 2 days before or the day before Pesach or 1 day before Shavuot? So you feel sad. You have a mitzvah to mourn for 7 days. Sit on the floor. Along comes the festival, the mitzvah to be joyous. Mitzvah of simcha. It overrides the mitzvah of mourning. Your Shiva is going to consist of only 1 or 2 days, not 7. These festival days, all these festival days mentioned, 6 plus 1, they all cancel out or stop the Shiva. Purim, it's a machloket, it's a later issue. Chanukah, those are rabbinic mitzvot. There's no biblical mitzvah of joy. Usually we say that the communal joy overrides your private, personal mourning. It can be very difficult when you're feeling so sad and so upset about your relative. The Shiva is actually a source of consolation, and it's the right, appropriate type of activity to do. And it's a real stretch. The Torah commands you to be happy on these 7 days, despite your personal loss. And it's quite a challenge to learn how to control your emotions and try to be joyous even though you're feeling so bad. This is a very strong, powerful statement of how we have the ability to control our emotions. And we have to think of all the good things. All right, so
Very hard to understand this.
yeah.
Just imagine your child is going to die 1 or 2 days
Oh,
before he
it's
passes
it's easy to
on. How
say,
can be happy?
very hard, very hard, very hard. But the Torah says you have to sit in the sukkah and be happy. You're mourning, but you stop mourning. You get up from your low stool and you go into the sukkah and you try to sing. It's very, very hard. They tell the story about I think the father of Rav Soloveitchik, that somehow the word came to him on Shabbat that his sister had died. And you're not supposed to be sad on Shabbat. And so he almost didn't flinch. He went on with his regular Shabbat schedule, 3 meals, singing, learning, and then Havdalah, makes Havdalah, boom, broke down crying. He broke down crying. He didn't let it out. He didn't allow himself to be mourning on the day when he's not supposed to be. And the festival is even more powerful. On Shabbat, there is actually mourning, just not public mourning, but whatever, he was a public figure. But this idea of being able to control your emotions and sort of compartmentalize, it's very difficult. I agree with you, Ravid. It's very difficult, but this is the mitzvah. We don't have eulogies. If someone dies during the week of Pesach, you bury them, of course, right away. It's not Yom Tov. We bury them during Chol HaMoed. But we don't say eulogies. There was one exception this year. There's a very public exception made when the D family, a mother and her 2 daughters, were gunned down to death by terrorists. And this was on the festival of Pesach. And they did give eulogies, they did speak, they made a big thing because it was a national tragedy, part of our fight against terror. And so the rabbis allowed them to have eulogies. But they didn't start sitting Shiva until the festival was over. And then they had a full, complete 7 days only after the festival was over. Matter of fact, I think tomorrow night is the Shloshim. And also the next night, they're having 2 events. A very inspiring family, how they're holding up and giving others encouragement how to deal with their loss. Very proud Zionists. They encouraged everybody to wave a flag even before the burial. The father, who's a rabbi, Rabbi Leo, I think his name is D. He's been giving inspirational messages all around the world, international media as well, because he speaks English, of course, so that's easy for them to understand. And a very, very powerful family. One other thing they did is, I forget what I was going to say, but oh yeah, this is what I was going to say, that the mother apparently died in such a way that it was okay. It was that she was able to donate her organs. And they donated her organs to 5 different recipients: a heart to this person, and a kidney to that person, and a lung. I don't know if the lungs or whatever. Different body parts. Very, very important mitzvah to be able to save a life. Of course, there's halachic issues exactly to make sure that they're dead. You can't go and harvest the organs before the people are dead. But they followed the rabbi's instructions, and they did a wonderful Kiddush Hashem, sanctification of God's name, even in their hardest time, the most tragic, violent death by terrorists, who, by the way, they just the Israeli army just found them and killed them.
Yes?
Yeah.
Recently. Just recently.
Yeah. I think day before yesterday, they found them and they killed them. So it doesn't bring the victims back to life, but at least they should know that there is some measure of punishment for such horrible acts. And so even in their hardest times, they were able to do these wonderful mitzvahs. It's amazing. It's amazing what medicine can do today. Okay, so it's a big mitzvah to donate your organs if halakhically sanctioned by a rabbi. Of course, there's always debates between rabbis, but they are following their rabbis. Okay, the next thing is page 29, back to the laws of the festivals. So we've covered lots of ground today, right? We talked about the positive commandments, the negative commandments, the ones which are common with Shabbat, the ones how it's a little bit different than Shabbat, the observances of sacred holidays where we're supposed to have meals like Shabbat, but even a little different. On Shabbat you have to have 3 meals, on Yom Tov only 2 meals, right? We talked about having nicer clothing. And then we now have recently been talking about the mitzvah of simcha, joy, and various types of joy. The only ones really mandated, if possible, if it's joyous for you, is to have meat and wine, to buy something new, and to give for women, and candies for the children. Children, you have to make sure that your children have some special joy as well. Depends on their age, of course. And a certain amount of flexibility for, what brings you joy. Of course, the opposite, mourning, is prohibited essentially on the festivals. So he says you should avoid what makes you sad, right? Some people love to read the newspaper and get angry. Oh, can't believe that. They did that. So, I'm conflicted. Are you allowed to do that or are you not allowed to do that? It makes you angry, but you're happy. You like to do that or you wouldn't be doing that. So it's, we have to avoid sad things and be joyous on the festivals. Okay, now page 29. Page 29, that's section 15. Initially, there was an additional mitzvah. As long as the temple stood, there was a mitzvah to travel there. Okay, Yosef, why don't you read for us, page 29?
The mitzvah of making a pilgrimage to Jerusalem in temple times. As long as the temple stood, there was a mitzvah to travel there for festivals. 3 times a year, all young males shall appear. Yira'eh literally will be seen before the sovereign Hashem Elohim of Israel. The Torah says 3 times, Shalosh Shekalim. A year you shall hold the festival for me. Shema 23, 14. Because of this mitzvah, the festivals are referred to as regalim, as people will travel to the temple by foot, ragel. Those who were unable to walk the distance from Yerushalayim to the Temple Mount because they were old, sick, or lame were exempt. Others who were exempt from mitzvah were the blind, the deaf, and the mute, as their appearance before Hashem is incomplete. The uncircumcised and the impure are also exempt.
Okay, skip to the next page, please. Page 30, top of page 30. When you came up to the temple, 3 korbanot, go ahead. Second line on page 30.
Okay. 3 korbanot were required on the pilgrimage festivals: Re'iyah, Chagiga, and Simcha. Chagiga 60. First, the mitzvah of Re'iyah involved appearing in the temple courtyard with an olat Re'iyah, pilgrimage burnt offering, which was consumed in its entirety in the fire of the altar. If one came to the courtyard without an olah, not only did he negate a positive commandment, but he transgressed a negative commandment as well. None shall appear before me empty-handed. Second Chagiga refers to the Shalmei Chagiga, pilgrimage feast offerings, only the fat of which was offered in the altar. Some of the meat was given to Kwani, while the majority of it was eaten in purity by the pilgrim, his relatives, and their guests. Third, the commandment of Simcha include the Shalmei Simcha, festive peace offering, one or more animals as needed. The more relatives and guests there were, the more Shalmei Simcha had to be offered. If one had separate obligation to bring offerings, such as Maaser, Behema, animal pride, or Korbanot Neder Udedeva, offering in which they obligated themselves, he fulfills the mitzvah of Simcha by offering them and eating their meat.
Okay, so that's where we get the idea. Out of all the joyous things that you can do to be happy, the sages didn't say go on tiyulim. They said you have to have meat. Where did they get this idea? From the Torah. The Torah says you should bring sacrifices which enable you to eat the meat in purity. So we see that eating meat is part of what's defined by the Torah as simcha. 3 types of offerings. Olah, you don't eat the shlamim, shalmei chagiga, and you do eat that, and then additional shlamim, if any more, if you want to have more meat, so you have more and more shlamim for the sake of joy and happiness. And of course, you should have that with your family, with your friends, with the poor people as well. If you look at the top of page 31, it's actually fascinating. Normally,
the offerings of individuals are not brought on Yom Tov. Nevertheless, the 3 offerings described above, Olat Riyah, Shalmei Chagiga, and Shalmei Simcha, are brought then, since it is a mitzvah to offer them on the first day of the festival. On Shabbat, though, these offerings are not brought. If one was unable to offer them on the first day, he may do so at any point during the festival. On Pesach, he has until 7th day, on Sukkot until the end of Shemini Atzeret, on Shavuot until 6th day after festival. After that, the mitzvah is lost.
So you're going to see, after Shavuot, it's a strange custom. We don't say Tachanun for 6 days after the festival. It's only a 1 day, right? Sukkot is a whole week. Pesach's a whole week. So you could get all those sacrifices done during the week in the temple. But on Shavuot, it's just 1 day. There's no way all the Jewish people come to the land of Israel and all to the Temple Mount, and they can all bring their sacrifices in 1 day. And so they would stay after Shavuot for the entire week. And people who didn't manage to bring their sacrifice on the first day, they would bring it on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. That's why they're a little bit festive. Those days, not just 1 day after the festival is festive, but 6 days after Shavuot is festive, and we'll see that we mark that until today. But of course, we don't have a temple, we don't have a pilgrimage, and there is therefore no mitzvah to go to Jerusalem. If you live in Kiryat Ono, you don't have to come to Jerusalem on the festival, but there is a custom to go up. I'm mentioning to Ravid, of course, because on Pesach, I fulfilled this custom. I went to the Kotel, to the old city, from Tekoa, with my son. I didn't walk. But, and who do I see at the Kotel? Ravid made the big trip all the way from the north. So there is a custom. It's been throughout history. Jews would try, but there's no obligation. Also, if you look at the bottom of page 31, it used to be, this is where the custom started. During temple times, there was an additional mitzvah to purify oneself by immersing before the festival. You go to the mikvah, as only those who were pure were permitted to enter the temple courtyard and eat sacrificial meat. However, now that the temple's ruins, we cannot offer korbanot, nor do we have the red heifer necessary to achieve purification from the impurity of corpses. Thus, the obligation to purify oneself for the festival is null and void. Nevertheless, some maintain that even today one must immerse before the festival. According to the majority of poskim, you don't have to, but there is a custom to go to the mikvah before the festivals. It's very similar to there's a custom to go to the mikvah before every Shabbat. Some people have to try to purify yourself, at least somewhat, for the upcoming holy day. Visiting the rabbi. Page 32. It says in the Talmud, one must visit his rabbi in the 3 pilgrimage festivals. This is so he can honor his rabbi and learn Torah from him. Doing so allows a person to connect with his rabbi and receive spiritual guidance and inspiration. The mitzvah shares something with the mitzvah to make a pilgrimage to the temple. As the sages declare, visiting one's rabbi is comparable to visiting the Shekhinah. Of course, the holy days when people are off from work are the proper time to do this. You have more time, you're not working. Indeed, it is an age-old custom to do so, as we see from the words of the Shunammite woman's husband in the book of Menachem. Her husband says to him, why are you going to the prophet? Today is not Shabbat or the new moon. This implies that on holy days, people visited the prophet. In any case, as he says, it depends on geography. If a person lives far away from his rabbi, you don't have to go. It's you have to make sure you have other types of joy in the festival, and there's no real halachic obligation, but if you look at the top page 34, it says there are those who are lenient about this, and others who attempt to find some justification for the leniency. In any case, if it bothers his wife, even those who are lenient can see that it is forbidden to leave the home and make the trip. Yeah, nowadays the definition of who is your rabbi is a little bit harder, because we learn from books, we learn from many rabbis, we have different relationships, and so in any case, even if you had thoughts, I forgive my honor, and you don't have to come visit me on the holidays. I'd love to see you, of course. There is a custom that many times rabbis host their students in their sukkah, right? There's a custom. We've done that many times, and during Chol HaMoed, but Pesach less so. But it depends. There is every year on the Chol HaMoed Pesach and Chol HaMoed Sukkot, the chief rabbis go to the Kotel, and they say, we're here, whoever wants to come to visit us. And people flock. People go to get a blessing, to see the great rabbis. And the other great rabbis, whoever have the following, many people do go, and they go and try to make a point to see their rabbis on the festivals. It's a nice custom. But I don't think it's as I said, many people are lenient. If it's, especially if we live far away, that's, if the rabbi was your neighbor, that's one thing. But if you live far away and you have other things to do, there is room to be lenient. Okay, good. So this is the overview, quite a long 30-page overview of the laws of the festivals. Now, as you can see, there's more details about each and every one of the issues we discussed. The laws of melacha is very important. Of course, Chol HaMoed, now before Shavuot, we don't have to study about Chol HaMoed. What we do have to study, though, is the rules. And Yom Tov Sheni, of course, we're here in the land of Israel, Baruch Hashem. We don't have to learn about Yom Tov Sheni. Even chapter 8. Now, chapter 8 is actually relevant this year. Special, not every holiday do you have to do an Eruv Tavshilin, but this year, Eruv Tavshilin it's uniquely relevant. Let's study what it is before we go into the other rules of Yom Tov. Briefly, take a look on page 127. When Yom Tov is followed by Shabbat, what day is Shavuot this year?
28th of May.
And what day of the week is that? Friday. Friday. Shavuot falls out on Friday. This year. Thursday evening and Friday. So when Yom Tov is followed by Shabbat, we have a special mitzvah this time. It wasn't so with Pesach. It was on a Wednesday, right? Tuesday night, Wednesday. And it wasn't for the seventh day of Pesach. And it wasn't for I can't remember when the last time this happened. But this time it happens. This coming Yom Tov falls out on Erev Shabbat. What are the rules? There's a special extra mitzvah. Take a look. When Yom Tov is followed by Shabbat, it is a mitzvah to set aside an Eruv Tavshilin before Yom Tov. What is an Eruv Tavshilin? Well, we're going to see. Doing so makes it permissible to cook and bake on Yom Tov for Shabbat. The Eruv consists of food that is prepared before Yom Tov. For Shabbat it is called an Eruv, literally merging, because it merges or joins together the food of Yom Tov and the food of Shabbat. Once the Eruv has been set, just as it is permissible to bake and cook on Yom Tov for Yom Tov purposes, it becomes permissible to bake and cook on Yom Tov for Shabbat purposes as well. True, on the Torah level, it is permitted to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbat, even without an Eruv. But the sages prohibited doing so in order to preserve the honor and dignity of both Yom Tov and Shabbat, and then he gets into the details. But briefly, the bottom line is, Yom Tov, you're allowed to cook just for Yom Tov. Use the Yom Tov day to start cooking for afterwards. Maybe it's a denigration of the Yom Tov. On the other hand, we have to make sure that the food is cooked for Shabbat, because you can't cook on Shabbat. So the simple answer is, well, why don't you cook on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? And put it in the refrigerator. Well, in the times of Chazal, they didn't have a refrigerator. And also, the food wouldn't taste as good. It's not fresh. If you're able to cook on Friday, for Friday night, the food will taste much better. The sages prohibited cooking on Yom Tov if it's not for the sake of Yom Tov. They wanted to make sure you preserve the honor and dignity of Yom Tov, and we're going to see how that's also preserving the dignity of Shabbat. And therefore, they came up with a mechanism. The mechanism is called Eruv Tavshilin. The word Eruv means merging. Tavshilin, what's a tavshil? Tavshil is a food. Food, yes. Cooked food. It's a dish. Eruv means merging. Mingling or merging, yeah. Merging of foods. Somehow we merge the foods. How do we do them? How do we do that? No.
Egg?
No, well.
By saying the prayer.
No, not the prayer is important, but most important is that we actually start cooking for Shabbat. At least one thing. It could be an egg, could be matzah, could be bread, could be chicken, could be anything. You start cooking a dish for Shabbat before Yom Tov starts. And so any cooking you're going to be doing on Yom Tov, if it's for Shabbat, will be a continuation of what you started already. You're not starting to cook for Shabbat on Yom Tov. You're continuing to cook for Shabbat. So you have to start for cooking for Shabbat even before the Yom Tov starts. We're going to see that how he explains it. There's two ways of explaining Eruv Tavshilin. But the word means Eruv, merging, Tavshilin, merging of foods. We need to somehow merge the foods in order to enable us to cook for Shabbat on Friday this year, this coming in 3 weeks' time, 2.5 weeks. I don't do this usually. I do make an Eruv Tavshilin. It's a mitzvah. But I usually don't cook on Yom Tov. Good. I also cook sometimes. Don't. It's true. She loves cooking and I don't love it. But I can cook and sometimes I do. Many times I cook. But my wife usually doesn't cook.
Also.
You know why? Even though I make the Eruv Tavshilin. Because we do have a refrigerator and a freezer. And Yom Tov, we want to celebrate. We want to enjoy. We just learned. So you should be spending your time enjoying. Half for you, half for God. It takes time to eat the meals, enjoy with your family and friends. It takes time to pray and to study Torah, 6 hours if you're following Rabbi Melabed. It's such a busy day. Do I really want to be spending my day on Friday cooking for the sake of Shabbat? And so usually, even though we're allowed to, if we make an Eruv Tavshilin, we don't utilize it. We cook everything for the Shabbat. before everything's cooked, not just one dish, an egg or a piece of chicken. Everything is cooked for Shabbat even before Thursday night, before the Yom Tov starts. And then when Shabbat comes, we take it out of the fridge, we put it on the hot plate, and we heat it up. And it's just as delicious, almost as delicious, in my opinion. And it's worth it for us to celebrate the Yom Tov in its full. So you're allowed, you don't have to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbat, especially nowadays, but it's allowed if you do this mechanism called Eruv Tavshilin. Now, why do I do it if I don't cook? Well, maybe I'll get hungry. Maybe some guests will come and I want extra food for Shabbat. But there's another reason. And that is, there's other things we do on the Yom Tov for the sake of Shabbat. Besides cooking, we light the Shabbat candles. So that's not quite cooking, so you're allowed to transfer fire. We'll learn about the rules of Yom Tov. But some people say that's a good reason you should have an Eruv Tavshilun. Also, maybe you want to, the minute before Shabbat comes, add some hot water to your kettle. Because you want to have enough hot water for your coffee and tea. So you're cooking on Yom Tov for the Shabbat. You need an Eruv Tavshilin. If it's early enough, maybe it's for the Friday afternoon. Maybe some guests will come on Friday afternoon. Maybe you're not cooking for Shabbat. Maybe it's cooking for the day. You're allowed to cook for Yom Tov, but not. If it's clear that it's not for Yom Tov, but it's for the next day, then you need an Eruv Tavshilin. In any case, it's a mitzvah. You make a bracha. So of course, everybody should do the mitzvah. And we'll see that the rabbi does it on behalf of the entire town. And so there's room to be lenient even if you didn't do it yourself. But you should try to do the mitzvah. So we do the Eruv Tavshilin, even though really practically we don't cook. Yeah, got it.
It's the same sideways that you Shabbat for
No, not the same. The opposite. If Shabbat comes first and then Yom Tov is on Sunday, you're not allowed to cook on Shabbat anyways. So there's no point in making an Eruv Tavshilin. On Yom Tov, when Yom Tov comes, then you can start cooking. Yom Tov, you're allowed to cook for the sake of Yom Tov, but not for Shabbat. Shabbat already happens, and so there's no Eruv Tavshilin when Shabbat comes first. It's only, and that's why it's relatively rare, it's only when Yom Tov falls out on Friday. This year it does. This year it happens in 2 weeks. Yom Tov is on Friday. Shavuot. Friday. Now, in Chutz La'aretz, it happens a little more often. Because they have 2 days of Yom Tov. So if either Yom Tov comes out on Friday or on Thursday, they have Thursday and Friday are Yom Tov. And then they have Shabbat right afterwards. So you need an Eruv Tavshilin probably double the amount of times or more. Because there's more options when Yom Tov will come immediately preceding the Shabbat. Sometimes Yom Tov falls out on Thursday, sometimes it falls out on Friday. And both of those situations, in Chutz La'aretz, you need an Eruv Tavshilin. So that's one mitzvah that you get in Chutz La'aretz more often than you do in the land of Israel.
Outside with lemon show, so it's let's say Shavuot before the Friday. So they observe 2 days. But how do they observe 2 days? Because the next day is Shabbat.
On Shabbat, they observe it as Shabbat and Yom Tov.
2 days.
Double, yes.
Okay.
In their Kiddush, they say Mekadesh HaShabbat veYisrael v'Zmanim. They say both. And in their prayers, they say both. The Torah readings are the Torah readings for the festival. We have a regular Shabbat. And this is fascinating. You know what's going to happen? After this Shabbat, the Jewish people are going to split. That's why everybody has to make aliyah. Because we don't want to have any divisions between the Jewish people. What's going to happen? Here in the land of Israel, Shavuot is Friday. And then what happens on Shabbat? What Torah reading are we going to read? Parashat Shavua, whatever the next week is. In Chutz La'aretz, like you said, Shabbat is going to be the festival, second day of the festival. You read a festival reading. They don't read the Parsha.
Go behind.
So they get behind the Parsha.
Okay.
When the next Shabbat comes, they're going to read whichever is the next Parsha. We already read that Parsha the previous Shabbat. So for a certain while, there's a difference between which Parsha is being read by the Jews in the land of Israel and the Jews outside the land of Israel.
But we never together.
They come back. They come back. Before Tisha B'Av, there's an option to double up a Parsha. They have a double Parsha, and we have only one Parsha. And so, because everybody has to read the same Parsha before Tisha B'Av, before Tisha B'Av, Parashat Dvarim. This is the custom. The word Eicha appears there. There's an element which somehow prepares for Tisha B'Av. So Tisha B'Av is 3 months away? No, less. 2 months away? 2.5 months? But so for 2 months, there's going to be a difference between the exiles, which parsha is being read in outside the land of Israel, which is in the land of Israel. And if you travel, you're in trouble. You could miss a parsha.
The app Sefaria is not smart enough to adjust that according to the location.
No, huh? But there are other apps which are, and you can find some smart apps, but watch out for that. Anyways, let's get back to Eruv Tavshilin and understand it a little better. Okay? This is a unique situation where Yom Tov falls out on Friday. Okay, let's read more on page 127. How is it preserving the honor of Yom Tov? Aaron, will you read? 127 in the last paragraph.
Okay, the honor of Yom Tov. The sages were concerned that
were it permissible
to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbat unconditionally, people would also cook on Yom Tov for the upcoming week, thus transgressing a Torah prohibition. Therefore, the sages permitted cooking on Yom Tov for Shabbat only for those who began the Shabbat preparation before Yom Tov by setting aside an Eruv Tavshilin. Then, any preparation for Shabbat undertaken on Yom Tov is simply a continuation of what was begun before Yom Tov. Once people are aware that without an Eruv Tavshilin, they may not cook on Yom Tov for Shabbat, they will realize that it is certainly prohibited to cook on Yom Tov for the upcoming week. The honor of Shabbat. The sages were concerned that because of the focus on preparing Yom Tov meals, people might forget that Shabbat was the next day and would finish all the good food on Yom Tov. Therefore, the sages required setting aside an Eruv Tavshilin before Yom Tov, which would help people remember on Yom Tov to leave some good food for Shabbat. Since an Eruv Tavshilin both honors Yom Tov and ensures that Shabbat will not be forgotten, it is a mitzvah for every Jew to set one aside. One must make sure to complete cooking for Shabbat before Shkia on Friday, so that in theory, the food being cooked could be eaten on Yom Tov if unexpected guests drop by.
That's a chumrah. I don't know that this is absolutely that you have to finish early. He says before Shkia. Okay, before Shkia. Of course, you're not going to cook after Shkia. It's Shabbat already after Shkia. After sunset is Shabbat. So, all right. But that's a detail. Let's continue. What is an Eruv Tavshilin? Go ahead, Aaron. Number 2.
Eruv Tavshilin is food that one sets aside before Yom Tov, when Yom Tov will be immediately followed by Shabbat. As long as the Eruv exists, everything that one may do on Yom Tov for the sake of Yom Tov may be done for the sake of Shabbat as well. The food used for the Eruv must be the kind of food which it is appropriate to eat with bread. This includes meat, fish, eggs, and bread. In contrast, food that is not appropriate to eat with bread, such as cereal, noodles, and rice, is not appropriate for the Eruv, even though it is cooked. Many people use hard-boiled eggs for the eruv, since they can last until Shabbat, even without a fridge. The food used for the eruv may be cooked, roasted, boiled, or smoked. Even pickled food may be used, as there is a principle that pickled is considered cooked. However, raw food may not be used as an eruv. It is preferable lechatchila to set aside an eggs bulk of bread as well, as there is an opinion that an eruv's cooked food allows people only to cook, while baked food is necessary to allow people to bake. Nevertheless, technically, one who set aside only cooked food may bake as well as cook for Shabbat.
Okay, so the custom is, that's why Aaron said it before, you boil an egg, and you take a piece of bread, you set it aside, it has to be big enough, the size of an egg. Well, an egg is the size of an egg. And a piece of bread, maybe 2 pieces of bread. People use matzah. Again, this is from the age before there was refrigeration. So foods that will stay well. And you set it aside, you make a bracha, and you say, this is the eruv. I'm setting this aside as an eruv tafshilin. And that will enable me to cook on Yom Tov. Okay, now, what do you do with the food? Okay, so the Yom Tov started. You have you learn Torah all night long. Shavuot. We're talking about eating Shavuot, yes. Shalom, shalom. You have your Yom Tov. What about the egg for the Eruv Tavshilin? So if you look at the bottom, the next, second to last paragraph, many people eat the Eruv's cooked food at one of the Shabbat meals. Once Shabbat comes, it served its purpose. And its purpose was a mitzvah. Isn't it nice to eat an egg, which is an egg mitzvah, a mitzvah egg, and not just a regular egg? Since this food has been used for one mitzvah, it is appropriate to use it to fulfill an additional mitzvah, Oneg Shabbat. Similarly, many people use the Eruv's bread as part of the Lechem Mishnah Tzudah Shlishit. But what you shouldn't do is don't eat it all up before Shabbat comes. Even if one ate part of the Eruv's cooked food on Yom Tov, he may still cook and bake for Shabbat, as long as the kazayit of the food remains. The food has to be there on Yom Tov. If less than a kazayit is left, no further melacha may be done on Yom Tov for Shabbat. Even if the Eruv's bread remains, it's not good enough, as the primary part of the Eruv is the cooked food. So we'll see that there's other ways around it. If your egg, your special egg, gets eaten up by accident by somebody who didn't know it was the Eruv. But okay, what's the procedure? The following is the procedure. Stephen, will you read the procedure for us? Page 131.
Placement uses of the Eruv Tashili. The following is the procedure for setting aside an Eruv Tashili. Taking the cooked food and the bread, one recite the following bracha. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctified us with his mitzvot and commanded us concerning the mitzvah of Eruv. Asher kiddushenu b'mitzvotav v'zivanu our mitzvot Eruv. Afterward, he should recite, with this Eruv, it shall be permitted to us to bake, cook, light a flame, and do everything necessary on Yom Tov for the sake of Shabbat. This text may be recited in the original Arabic as found in Sidurim or in translation. If one intends to slaughter animals on Yom Tov for Shabbat, to separate food, or to grind spices, he should ideally mention this when setting aside the Eruv. However, if he didn't mention it, any malaka that may be done on Yom Tov may be done for the sake of Shabbat. After all, the declaration recited when setting aside the Eruv is a sweeping one. Everything necessary on Yom Tov for the sake of Shabbat. Even if one has no plan to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbat, he should set aside an Eruv and recite the bracha. Because the primary goal of the Eruv is to allow for the possibility of cooking, so it is relevant even if he does not end up doing so. Additionally, by setting aside the Eruv, he remains aware that Shabbat is coming and will make certain to prepare food to enjoy its 3 meals. Besides, according to the Moscow scheme, it is having an Eruv which allow one to light Shabbat candle on Yom Tov. When a head of household set aside an Eruv, all family members and any guest sleeping there are thereby allowed to cook and bake for Shabbat. It is even permissible for a head of a household to appoint a family member or guest to set aside the Eruv on everyone's behalf. Likewise.
Okay, skip to section 4.
Okay.
There's a fancy custom. Page 133. Yes, Gabi.
So, unlike other Yom Tovs, you can light a candle for a fire.
No, you don't strike a match, but you can move a fire from one candle to another candle.
Existing fire.
An existing fire that already was lit before Yom Tov. That's what he means. You don't strike a match, yeah. Maybe it was written unclearly. Where did you see that it sounds like?
No, it says in 1
Light Shabbat candles. Yeah, not from scratch. You have to transfer the fire. But that's what he means. Okay, page 133, I'll just read it quickly. It says, although each person has a mitzvah to set aside an Erev Tavshilin, there's a mitzvah incumbent on the leading resident of the city, that is the local rabbi, to set aside an Eruv for everyone in the area. So the rabbi usually does it on behalf of everybody. His Eruv allows everyone to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbat, even if they themselves forgot to set aside an Eruv or were unable to do so. Similarly, one who does not know how to set aside an Eruv may rely upon the rabbi's Eruv. Anyways, you should know that exists in case you don't do it yourself. But why would you not do it yourself? It's a mitzvah. We continue those details. What happens if there's no Eruv Tavshilin? Well, we said we rely on the rabbi in your neighborhood. If you don't have one, so then you don't cook for Shabbat. And there's ways to get around it. You put lots of food for cooking for your Yom Tov meal in the morning. And if you're not going to have any food for Shabbat, you can do that. In any case, that is the special rule of Eruv Tavshilin. Tomorrow, B'ezrat Hashem, we'll continue discussing what about the melachot are different from the melachot of Shabbat. We have chapters 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 to cover. And then we need to get to chapter 13 about Shavuot itself. Right? These are just all the rules for every Yom Tov, all 7 days. 6 plus 1. To be continued, B'ezrat Hashem, tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you.